crisis is the most pressing issue of our times, and the best weapon against it is awareness. This is where journalists play a crucial role in forming and raising awareness in society to increase understanding of the need for environmental protection. Hello everyone and welcome to Our Voices. I am Simenyi Oye and I'm joined by my co-host Anastasia Tudieshe.
Hello.
Hello. And Ginny Niwa is back with us.
Yeah.
Welcome back.
Thank you.
Orian Itangshaka is off today. Today, the world celebrates World Press Freedom Day under the theme Journalism in the Face Environmental Crisis. And we will discuss the role of media in shaping public perception and policy making regarding environmental issues. Hello again.
Hi.
Hi. So here at VOA, we constantly cover, climate change issues and other environmental degradation issues, especially on Africa. So how do you connect the role of the media with climate change?
Well, I mean, let's go back 20 years ago. The media used to warn everybody about climate change, and it was like a rumor. It was like, you believe it or you don't. But right now, everything is happening right in our face, but we still need more information. They still need, a need for awareness. So yes, the media has a very important role in, covering climate change.
Have you seen any reporting maybe?
Yeah, so Ginny and I come from the Congo, a country known to have the second world's lung regarding the forests. And exactly at that time last year, I was publishing a piece for the British think tank Chatham House. And the name of the piece was The Role of the Congo's Forests, Peatland and People in Safeguarding the Planet. And what I discovered is that women in the forest, in the environmental world and in rural areas are welcomed as part of the labor force, but excluded from decision making.
Yeah.
So they are organizing and creating organization so that they can have a say to the decision making when it comes to
I like the point you made, especially women are the most affected by climate change impacts.
Absolutely.
When I was a journalist in Ethiopia, I intensively covered climate change issues, environment issues, and I had a chance to travel around the country to see the impacts, not only in Ethiopia. I even went to rural areas of Zambia, Malawi, Tanzania, South Africa, Botswana. I have seen how especially women are suffering from climate change related impacts. I have seen how families lost their farmlands and their resources, and women cannot feed their children anymore because rain is not coming and the field is not giving grains, or they are the pastoralists, they are not getting enough milk to give to their children anymore. And for women, because they are financially insecure and because they are less educated, they end up being displaced. And they don't even own land, right? Yeah. So they get displaced and they even get exposed to other gender-based violence. Indeed. And you can see that how, there is a lot of issues when it comes to climate change impacts. And sadly, they don't even know what's happening to them, right? Mm-hmm. That's where the media comes in creating awareness.
Absolutely.
Well, Africa is the least contributor to the rise in greenhouse emissions, with only 2 to 3% of the world's carbon dioxide emissions. However, according to United Nations, African countries are disproportionately facing the impact of climate change, including increased drought and floods. In East Africa, for example, recent deadly floods have killed at least 155 people in Tanzania and affected more than 200,000 others. In Kenya, over 170 people have died since the start of the rainy season in March, while overflowing of Lake Tanganyika in Burundi have displaced more than 130,000 people from their homes. That's why climate reporting is not optional. United Nations says journalists have a responsibility to inform the public of climate change threats and educate them on how to make better decisions for themselves, their communities, and their planet. But not without a risk. As International Press Institute reports, journalists covering environmental stories are often subjected to arrest, physical violence, online attack, restricted access to information, and freedom of movement. On this week's edition of Our Voices, we will focus on the important role of environmental journalism and the challenge they face as they seek to document environmental effects.
This year's World Press Freedom Day theme is journalism in the face of the environmental crisis, and a South African media outlet called Ox Pickers focuses on exactly that. For VOA, Kate Bartlett spoke to some of its journalists about what drives and challenges them as they report on people and practices that hurt the planet.
Thabo Malulekwa was a news junkie from a young age. He recalls how growing up, he used to beg his dad to let him watch a current affairs show that aired way past his bedtime.
I told myself that one day I will be a journalist and I will help the communities. And up to now, the stories that I write, I make sure that there must be some kind of action or some kind of answers that comes from the policyholders, the people in the government.
As an award-winning reporter with Oxpacker's investigative environmental journalism, a media outlet headquartered in South Africa, he does exactly that, at some risk.
In the stories that I do find officials hiding information from me. And when I go to dig deeper, some of the people will say, please, you can publish this, but anonymously. That shows you that here there is some kind of danger, something is being hidden.
He remembers reporting on illegal mining at an abandoned gold mine in Johannesburg.
We tried to get some footage, but we were told that here, guys, you can be shot. And you don't want to go next to those people because there are powerful people that they are working for. You ask for an interview, you are dead.
But he keeps reporting, saying the issues he covers are crucial to people in impoverished communities who don't have a voice. And Oxpacker's stories do make a difference. An investigation into mining near a major water source in South Africa brought change.
And there were plans by a mining company to mine coal. We reported on that, and that has resulted in a lot of changes around policy and laws relating to mining and how it should operate.
Oxpackers relies on cutting-edge technology combined with boots-on-the-ground reporting to expose environmental offences and track perpetrators.
We've also used a range of other tools that include satellites, drones, and various multimedia tools. So we combine geojournalism, data journalism, and these other new media tools with traditional investigative journalistic techniques.
Oxpacker's website includes mapping and data sets on mining, wildlife crime, timber issues, renewable energy, and more. While focused on Southern Africa, the non-profit has expanded its network to Asia and Europe. Many of these stories focus on wildlife crimes involving endangered African species like rhinos and pangolins. Again, Oxpacker's stories have proved consequential. McLeod says its reporting has led to the prosecution of a number of trafficking kingpins. Kate Bartlett, VOA News, Duduza Township, South Africa.
Thanks, Kate, for that report. Now, to learn more about the challenge in covering the environment as well as climate-related issues in parts of Africa, we have invited Sophia Mbugua, an environmental journalist and media consultant based in Nairobi, Kenya. Sophie is the founder of Africa Climate Conversations, a multimedia platform that includes a weekly 30-minute podcast highlighting the climate change story from the African perspective. Sophie, it's a great pleasure to have you on Our Voices.
Thank you so much for having me.
So you have dedicated your journalism career to exclusively cover climate change, energy, and other environment-related issues. So how do you evaluate the impact of climate reporting on society?
Climate change is, I would say, it's more real now. It's hitting home more today. As you can see, not only is it flooding in East Africa, we're also experiencing a lot of drought. We have actually, when you look at Zimbabwe, there've been a lot of issues in terms of drought, Southern African region in terms of issues, lack of water. We've had heat waves in West Africa. And it tells you like this is not just an issue that was seen, because it was seen from a far end, something that is emanating from the West, but it's something that we need to take serious. And there's something that we need to actually do more research in terms of looking forward, in terms of where we are going, what exactly the projection, what is expected. The science has been there, but I think it calls for more understanding and for more action and understanding that is not something that needs to be done tomorrow, but it's something that needs to be done today, because it's impacting people directly every single day.
And thank God, voices like yours, Sophie, are here to remind all of us of that. As a reporter back in DRC, I found it at times challenging to be a woman in my field. Do you find it particularly challenging to do what you do?
At the beginning, yes, I did. At the beginning, because in the first place, someone sees you, but they're like expecting that you're not going to go far. Or sometimes you find yourself in a situation where, favors, for you to access some information in terms of other, say, for example, people expect different aspects that you're not going to actually be able to last for a long time. Mm-hmm. But then over time, once you understand this is actually, because for me, I quit my job, my radio job, to actually do this, environmental protection. It is something that I found, this is what I want to do. And so at the beginning, you have to create a niche for yourself, and you have to actually understand, look forward in terms of where do I want to go in the couple of years that I want, in the next coming years. And then you strategize and you realize that we are all equal in one way or another. But then again, it's that one particular aspect to realize I am a woman, yes, and the people that I am actually, reporting about in communities that I meet every other single day, and meeting especially women who are really highly impacted by climate change. But also it's that aspect of realizing that when it comes to climate change, all of us are innate. It's not about men and women are impacted differently, but also it comes in terms of when it comes to issues of reporting. Sometimes there are places that I found myself in situations where as a woman, in terms of security, of not being able to access, or maybe, there are different dimensions when it comes to access and security when it comes to women and men.
I bet. So did you notice a change once you made the decision and stayed the course in people's reaction?
Respect. You realize, at the beginning, I remember the first time, there is someone who, once I was reporting and they looked at me and they didn't take me seriously, because once I was a freelance. Secondly, they had not seen me on any major platform back here at home, because much of my work that I've done was actually, I actually reported for international media. And so I remember one person, really profiling you. I think that's what I would actually say. I was profiled mainly at the beginning, but I think as time went by and people started reading my work, people started seeing the work that I'm actually doing, and you can send someone links and they can associate you with specific media houses and sometimes big media houses, then I found respect. That people now, you start commanding some respect that at the beginning wasn't there.
Nice. And I mean, just the fact that, you quit your job to solely focus on this issue, that says a lot about, the urgency of what's going on right now. But also, I want to go back to what you said earlier. It's hitting home. So what are the pressing issues, in Kenya or elsewhere in the continent in relation of climate change that you have seen and experienced?
I think the pressing issues that, for me, I would say we need to ask ourselves as a continent, the pressing story is asking, should Africa move at the same pace that the world is moving? The reason I'm saying that is because, yes, climate crisis is an emergency. When you, at the beginning, we said that Africa is contributing very little in terms of emissions. Mm-hmm. But then again, you find a continent that is not prepared. When Paris Agreement was actually passed, you find that many African countries were very fast, and they were very fast in terms of adopting this particular agreement. But then again, look at what we did in terms of drafting our NDCs. Much of that was drafted not specifically in terms with research in terms of where we're going, but mainly was drafted by for depending on where the money was coming from. And you also find right now the rush in terms of implementing, mitigating climate. Yes, I completely understand the urgency and the need to go carbon neutral. But then again, I feel like Africa needs to pause.
And that's where we will end. We would love to keep you longer, Sophie, but thank you so much for sharing your experience with us. We'll take a pause right now. We really want to thank you, Sophia Mbugua, founder of Africa Climate Conversations, for sharing your personal experience and extensively covering climate change on the continent as we mark World Press Freedom Day. We will continue our conversation on how media can help fight climate change and ways to support it. When we come back, we will also hear from Lisa Palmer, research professor of science communication at George Washington University. We also love, you know that, to hear from you on social media platforms. We are on Facebook, Instagram, and X, formerly known as Twitter, and our handle is at VOA Africa. Don't forget to use the hashtag VOA Our Voices. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
In times of change, when the world seems uncertain and what we hear doesn't reflect what we see, we seek the truth. When we are told only part of the story, we lose trust. In moments of crisis, our dreams, hopes, and wishes for a better tomorrow depends on a free press. At Voice of America, we bring you the stories that people take risks to see. We connect the world and unite it with truth. At Voice of America, we show you the whole picture.
Health, wellness, sport, beauty, medical breakthroughs. Healthy Living cares about your well-being. What are the main health concerns in Africa and around the world? Find out the latest on coronavirus. Connect with our experts and ask them questions.
How long does the virus stay?
Join me, Linor Moudou, in Washington, every week on Healthy Living, right here on VOA.
You're watching VOA's Red Carpet. My name is Jackson Vunganyi. Thank you so much for joining us each week right here on Red Carpet. We bring you the latest in
You are with Our Voices and welcome back. Today we are celebrating World Press Freedom Day, which is marked around the world under the theme Journalism in the Face of Environmental Crisis. Joining us in the studio is Lisa Palmer, Research Professor of Science Communication at George Washington University and Senior Editor and Education Lead at Planet Forward Eco-Journalism Program. Ms. Palmer is also award-winning environmental and science journalist, and she has a book titled Hot Hungry Planet, The Fight to Stop a Global Food Crisis in the Face of Climate Change. Ms. Palmer, it's a great pleasure to have you here with us.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Of course. And your book mainly discusses, it discusses the planet's greatest challenge in terms of climate change. So how do you see the role of the media in this fight?
Well, I think the more we talk about climate change, the more we can start to focus on solutions. You know, the climate change is occurring all over the world. As my students today are are able to even write stories about how their lives already have been impacted by climate change, no matter where they come from. So we know that climate change is occurring. It's largely affected by what humans are doing, and it will have devastating effects for human populations all over the world. And so we don't have to go far to be able to tell stories on this. But I really like to say that the media has a job to do about reporting more on the solutions of what's available.
Do you say that it's playing the role, or is it yet to play?
It still needs to play. I think it's definitely failed in many areas in journalism because, number one, there's been a huge number of cuts in environmental journalism. It's not necessarily the biggest clicks. We know that the stories are complex. People don't want us to stick with a complex story. And so there's a lot of lack of funding for these important stories that aren't easy to do. They have to go into some hard-hit places. They're often remote and sometimes on private land. And they're, like you said, others have said, they are often put the reporter in kind of some vulnerable conditions. I've been in those myself, and so it's not for everybody, but these are important stories to tell.
Definitely.
Before we continue our conversation, let's hear from journalists on the continent about their role in climate change reporting. Our reporter Sheila Pony from South Sudan capital, Juba, spoke to Awan Achek, a journalist from the Dawn Daily newspaper, freelance journalist, Legoni Denis Mouye, Jennifer James, a reporter at the City Review newspaper, and last but not least, Denis Maurice Mimbugbe, an environmental broadcast journalist in our Your Voice segment. Take a listen.
The role of journalists is very simple, is to educate, inform, and entertain the public. So we understand there's a lot of issues to do with the environment in the country. We have things to do with the floods last year and other things that are related to the environment. So our role there is to educate the public about the impact of environmental issues on them and other issues related to environment.
Journalists in South Sudan have done their part as far as reporting on these issues are concerned, but there are still some challenges as far as reporting on these issues. When you look at floods and drought in the country, you realize that all these issues do happen in places where there is insecurity, where it is inaccessible for a journalist to go to those places. So it becomes very difficult for a journalist to go get right-hand information from the source. In other countries, you'll find that there is always updates that are given as far as environment is concerned. But in our country, there's nothing of such. So we need to have more scientists, and because environment is about science, and without science, journalists cannot report accurately on these issues of flooding and drought in South Sudan.
As a journalist, my role concerning this year's theme is I should inform the public on the danger of polluting environment. And second to that, I supposed to write stories that will hold government officials accountable because they are not following their roles. For instance, if we looked at South Sudan currently, we have a lot of environmental issues untouched, and government are quiet. As a journalist, it's my role to wake them up and hold them accountable and let public know that government are supposed to do ABCDs.
The challenge we face is that lack of knowledge in reporting on environmental issues. Reporting on environmental issues, there are certain things you're supposed to talk about. There are certain impact there are certain elements you're supposed to point out in a story. But now, sometimes if a journalist is not trained how to report environmental issue on science issue, it will be very difficult. If you want to report, you'll see journalists reporting only flat, forgetting other important issues.
Yeah, that's thank you so much for the reporters for sharing. And I like the point she raised about the gap in information
Absolutely,
access.
and that was my question, Lisa. Earlier you mentioned that environmental journalists could do and should do more. And do you see that there is a gap between scientists and journalists?
The scientists are now starting to come along with the importance of communicating with journalists and collaborating more on some stories, and so I'm seeing a lot more potential there for storytelling.
So how can we help media and journalists, equip them more to report more on climate change issues?
Well, I think having convenings and getting people together with sharing ideas and resources is one way. We do at Planet Forward. It's a storytelling platform at George Washington University to help to lift the skills of early career journalists, and so we work with them on at an annual summit, but also work with journalists throughout Africa with Mandela Fellows we host every year as interns, as well as reporters from Cameroon and Nigeria this past year.
Yeah, that's very interesting.
You're doing an amazing job.
Very amazing job. And maybe one more, we heard that environment journalists, especially I saw a report today, they face arrest, risk, intimidation from governments, from private companies. Can you speak about that?
I have done a lot of research on that with digital attacks against journalists especially. And female journalists are getting attacked in different ways than male journalists. And so having the sensitivity there among the editorial boards of your various news publications, it's really important to work on that. Advocate for journalists to be able to tell these stories and to support them in what they need to be able to cover the stories effectively.
Maybe a tip for them on how to protect themselves while exposing these stories?
Yeah, there are definitely some trainings there. For instance, if you're going to the field, communicating with others where you are at all times, and having regular check-ins, co-reporting with other people so that you have a few people that are working on a story. A witness for that.
All right. Thank you so much, Lisa. It was a great pleasure having you. And this is where we end our show. We thank our environmental journalists that joined us today, Sophia Mbugua, founder of Africa Climate Conversations, and of course, Lisa Palmer, professor of science communication at George Washington University and senior editor of Planet Forward. Be sure to watch our voices on the VOA website at voaafrica.com or on our YouTube channel, where you can catch up on the latest episodes and the world's top news stories. Last but not least, we thank our editorial and production team on Our Voices. We'll see you again next week with another exciting program. Be sure to continue the conversation on our social media platforms. Until then, thanks for watching.